When I set out to start writing Rise of the Necromancer, I wasn't really sure how it was going to turn out in the end. But in light of my most recent publication with this story, I've gotten a lot of questions from fans, and I wanted to use this video to maybe try and answer some of those and maybe shed a little bit more light on this story that you guys are all talking about. So, I'm Samantha Rose, and today I will be talking about Rise of the Necromancer. Consider it a kind of silent interview, I guess you could say. These are all questions that I have received regarding my story, and I will do my best to try and answer them for you. So, let's get started. I think zombies are kind of unique in the sense that they're an unrelenting force of raw strength and indomitable power, and they are fueled on nothing but the emphasis of hunger. And when it comes to zombies, you can do a lot with them. So I wanted to do something different by throwing a horde of undead into a medieval fantasy world. And at first, I really didn't think the idea would work all that well. It sounds kind of weird and odd when you sit and think about it, zombies in a medieval fantasy world. But on the flip side of that, it's kind of a unique premise, I think, because I don't know if it's ever really been done before, at least not in the way that I've done it. And yes, there are zombies in this story, but they are not the main antagonist like you would think they are when you're talking about a medieval zombie apocalypse. They are mostly in the background, at least for this first book. And though their presence lingers in the darkness of ruined cities and fallen kingdoms, they are still a prominent threat to the rest of humanity. And aside from the zombies, I had another force in the background, and it was the War of Two Kings, which I only talked about a little bit in book one, because at the point of the book starts, it's already been happening for 3 years, and the world has been ravaged by war. Innocents are dead. Villages have become desolate hovels where the haunted roam about like ghosts. And I thought it was kind of unique, because how would somebody from that time react if they came face to face with a horde of hungry, ravenous undead? And that right there is the basis that drove me to incorporate zombies into my medieval fantasy story. I think that in the terms of characters and character developments as the narrative goes on, I wanted to use a smaller cast of wholesome people that readers could relate to on a more emotional level. And with a smaller cast, there's only like 6 or 7 main protagonists in the story through 400 pages. But with a smaller cast like that, I was able to tell a more condensed and a more cohesive narrative by sticking to just these few characters. I was able to get into their heads a bit more and highlight the emotions that drive them in their quest. And with a small cast of characters, it's easier to do that. Whereas if you have 40 different main characters, you're going to lose track of who's who eventually, and how this person feels about this person, and what this person might have said to the other person, and it becomes a little bit confusing in that regard. I wanted to create a cast of characters that felt real. I wanted to create dialogue that felt real between these people, and with that smaller number, it's easier for me as a writer to get into each of their heads a bit more and provide more depth as to their motivations and their determinations and their ambitions and the things that drive them onwards as the narrative evolves. Sometimes it's easier to just condense instead of expand. And with a more condensed cast, readers, I feel, can have a much easier time relating to individuals of that smaller cast. So that's why there aren't a whole lot of characters in this story. Yes, there are people in the background and there are things happening in the background, but those are irrelevant in the longer scale of things. They're just there for fluff added to the scene. A smaller cast creates a much easier desire to express the way that these characters act and react to one another compared to a much larger cast. And I really hope that each one of these characters, like I said, there's only like 6 or 7, has some kind of emotional trauma or psychological trauma that readers can relate to. And that right there is what I was aiming to do with a smaller cast. So, with this opening for Chapter 3, A Lady and a Lord, I wanted to create a haunting atmosphere of that kind of reflected the way that the world of Immortalia stands in the wake of the War of Two Kings. And for those of you that aren't familiar with this passage, I will read it for you real quick. A pale moon had perched itself high in the clear sky, its full white face gazing upon the sleeping plains below, where the settlement of Carath stood in quiet solitude. Its marble building shined in the midnight light, silver moonbeams weaving in and out of the jutting stonework. The two elements tangled amidst one another in an elegant haunted dance of tranquil serenity, a moonlit sonata that went unheard in the ears of the sleeping inhabitants. Narrow roadways of marble and stone serpentined in and out of buildings that stood scattered about with careful deliberation, a glossy gray and black snake that slithered free of dead ends, the stone glistening like reptilian scales beneath the moonlight above. Okay, so yeah, I wanted to create a haunting sense of something that was kind of sinister about Immortalia in the wake of the War of Two Kings, which, like I said earlier, has ravaged every single kingdom, and a lot of innocents have died, and there's blood that has been spilled everywhere. With this passage, and there's a lot of these kind of passages spread throughout the book, through 400 pages, these passages appear like this, and it's all to create a haunting, foreboding sense of atmosphere, because the world of Immortalia is fractured because of the War of Two Kings. Man fights against man, blood is spilled on both sides, and innocents die in the wake of their violence. And with a passage such as that one, you can kind of see and feel the dread that lingers in the air of this war-torn world. And like I said, there's a lot of these kind of passages spread throughout this book, and it's all just a sense of atmospheric building, because I really wanted for my readers to see that Immortalia has become a broken place where there used to be peace and prosperity. There exists dread and empty towns and desecrated ruins, and all of these passages like this are meant to be a reflection of that kind of turmoil. Because as the story goes on, as the narrative evolves, you're going to see so much more desolation and ruin come to Immortalia because of the undead. So I just kind of wanted to create a sense of somber atmosphere to really make you feel like, yeah, This world is fractured now. And that's honestly all that I was trying to do with this one. Another excellent question, and it's a good one to ask, I feel, given that the Necromancer himself doesn't actually appear until 2 or 3 chapters right before the end of the book. And the reason for that is, just like the undead that pop up throughout the narrative, I wanted the Necromancer to be an omnipotent presence in the background. I wanted his presence to be known, and I wanted his presence to be feared. I wanted to create that sense of suspense surrounding the Necromancer, the titular character. And it's because as a background antagonist, he is able to manipulate the characters as they go about on their quest. And I feel like that kind of power, without actually being present, is a lot more terrifying than just having a bad guy with a sword. And it's interesting because as a background character, as a background antagonist, the Necromancer is able to weave the narrative into his own personal desires, and he's able to fulfill his own ambitions by disrupting the flow when he does show up. And when he does show up, it's in very few instances until right at the end, when all chaos breaks loose. I don't want to give too much away, but by keeping the Necromancer strictly in the background, the reader is able to see just how powerful that this character can be, because his influence spreads across all of these characters throughout the entire runtime of this book, and he isn't even present until the very end. There's something kind of, I feel, darkly satisfying about that kind of writing. By keeping him in the background, I was able to showcase just how influential this guy can be. And so that really is the reason for that. Like the zombies themselves, I didn't think this idea was going to work. And at first, I had scratched the idea completely. But as the narrative evolved, it sort of became second nature after a certain point. Serena finds herself face to face with a witch. And the witch is the Necromancer's mother. So she uses her magic to show Serena her past and to show her why the Necromancer is such a dangerous entity that needs to be confronted, needs to be put down. It was at that point that I stopped and thought, this idea might not be so bad, because I was able to use the witch's magic to show Serena the past in a way by showing her the witch's memories. So I took it one step further. The witch manipulates Serena's mind and is able to pull a memory from within, the moment that her home village was overran by a horde of the undead. And it was at that point that I decided this witch was going to be the witch of memory, because her power allows her to magnify a moment in a person's past and make it like it's real, like they're actually back in that moment. So I thought, okay, so she shows Serena this moment from her past when her village is overrun, and Serena actually ends up time traveling to escape from the abyss after the witch possesses her as a means of getting out. That is the witch's angle in this whole thing. She wants to use Serena for a much darker purpose that I am not going to tell you. But tackling it from that way allowed me to kind of incorporate a fantasy element into the whole science of time travel. I don't know shit about time travel, okay, other than you're not supposed to do it and you're not supposed to change the past and whatever. But the respective chapter is called The Butterfly Effect. And what happens when Serena goes back is she realizes that she's actually gone back to that moment. And she breaks every single rule about time travel to save another. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Having the witch use magic as a means of conjuring this memory gave me an in to incorporate it into a medieval fantasy story, because most fantasy stories have magic. And so that is kind of how it was able to work. I don't know if it worked all that well, but I haven't really heard any complaints about it otherwise. And I just think it's an interesting concept in itself, that of time travel. I didn't set out to start doing that, but it eventually happened. And as this series progresses, so far I have 4 books planned, by the way. As this series progresses, the concept of memory, and I guess if you call it time travel in the sense of memory, is going to become more prominent, especially for the character of Serena. But that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil too much because it is quite fascinating the way that the narrative veers off in this kind of way, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody that hasn't read it yet. So that right there is all that I did with that. I took the element of magic, and instead of making time travel a science fiction thing, I turned it into a fantasy element by using the magic of a witch. And I guess that is why it worked so well. Aside from the obvious answer of sequel baiting, for example, Elias and Kate find themselves cornered by a ravenous horde of the undead, and Maya and Crane are dealing with a devastating loss, and then the Necromancer comes, and then the book ends. I wanted people's jaws to hit the floor, I guess. I wanted to be brutal with this. I wanted to be cruel, and I wanted to leave it to where the anticipation of what happens to these characters continues into the second book, which is called Fall of Humanity, and it will be out sometime soon. But I wanted to be vicious, and I wanted people to, I guess, kind of hate me a little bit because it is such a jarring cliffhanger. And the twists aside, on top of this ending, I thought it would be fun to not have an ending, if that makes any sense, because that's all cliffhangers are, essentially. There is no ending, at least not yet. But I just thought it would be fun to mess with my readers' heads a little bit and make them be like, nah, when they finish the book. You know what I'm saying? I wanted that kind of a reaction, and it might upset some people, and it might make some people really anxious for the sequel or sequels that are to come. You know, it's like that famous saying with Game of Thrones: don't get too attached to certain characters because they're not going to make it. And now with the Necromancer out and about, things really ramp up right at the beginning of book 2. So that's all that I really wanted to do with that ending. I wanted my readers to feel some kind of a resentment. I wanted my readers to feel some kind of frustration, some kind of elation, some kind of excitement and anxiousness, and I was just trying something different. Like I said, this is a unique story all the way around, and I thought, why not up the stakes a little bit? And that's all that I did. So that is my answer to that question. Off the top of my head, I am a good way through book 2 right now. Again, it is called Fall of Humanity. I have book 3 planned, and it's called Desolation of Angels, and there will be a 4th book called Wrath of the Fallen. As far as all that is concerned, I really don't know how many are going to be in this series. But it will be a complete series when everything is done, and everything will come together quite nicely, I promise. I'm glad that you're excited for the second book. It is going to pick up right where the first one leaves off. The cliffhangers are going to be resolved. New characters are going to be introduced. New places are going to be explored. I'm going to talk more about the War of Two Kings and its influence on the world of Immortalia as a whole. And there's going to be some nice surprises as the story goes on. But perhaps those are questions for another day. And with that, I want to say I thank you for these questions that you guys have asked me. I picked the ones that I thought needed the most explanation, and I had so many others, but if you guys do have any questions regarding this story, or if there's anything you want me to elaborate on, or anything you want me to talk more about as far as character development and world building and atmospheric building and all of that stuff, I will be more than happy to. Just shoot me a message or, whatever, get a hold of me like that, and I will do my best to comprise another video like this if that's something that you guys would be interested in. I do think that this story is going to go a long way, and I do think that this series is going to resonate with a lot of readers. There's a lot of important issues that pop up, and there's a lot of impactful dialogue, and there's a lot of emotional character development, and I feel like it's going to resonate with readers very well. I could just be tooting my own horn, but I'm a writer. That's what I do. Anyways, I thank you guys for your time. Thanks for checking this interview out, again, if you want to call it that, and I will see you guys next time, okay? I've been Samantha Rose, and I wish you all adieu.